The sky burned with unnatural fire. It wasn't a storm, not lightning or meteors. These were deliberate strikes, precision-guided death falling from the heavens. Cities lit up like flares in the night as beams of energy carved through military bases, power grids, and defense systems with terrifying ease. Fighter jets launched in desperation. Missiles streaked toward the invaders. But nothing worked. The alien ships absorbed kinetic impacts like they were nothing more than dust. Across the globe, screens flickered with emergency broadcasts. Governments issued urgent warnings. This is not a drill. Evacuate major cities immediately. Panic spread faster than any virus ever could. Streets became rivers of fleeing bodies. Highways clogged with cars moving nowhere fast. Some people refused to believe it at first, thinking it was a hoax, a simulation gone wrong. Others fell to their knees, praying to gods who had never answered so loudly before. In New York, Tokyo, London, Beijing, people watched in horror as towering warships hovered above their cities, silent, unmoving, watching. They didn't speak, didn't negotiate, just destroyed, then paused. And that silence, that stillness, it was worse than the attacks. Military satellites orbiting Mars vanished without a trace. Deep space observatories recorded bursts of energy unlike anything ever seen. Readings suggested weapons operating on principles beyond human understanding. Scientists scrambled to make sense of it all, but there was no time. There was only survival. A naval fleet near the Pacific tried to mount a counterattack. Missiles launched. Fighter drones surged forward. Then came the pulse, a shimmering wave that passed over them like breath across candlelight. Every ship lost power. Every drone dropped from the sky. Radio chatter cut out mid-sentence. No explosions, no fire. Just sudden, complete failure. In Moscow, a general slammed his fist against a steel table. "We have nothing that can stop this," he growled. In Washington, the president sat motionless in the war room, staring at footage of entire squadrons being erased from existence. In Beijing, engineers rushed to reverse engineer captured wreckage, hoping for even a single clue about how the enemy's shielding worked. But every scan returned the same result. Unknown materials, unknown technology. There was no strategy, no playbook. Nothing humanity had built, refined, or relied upon held weight against this force. For the first time in history, every nation faced the same enemy, and none of them were ready. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the assault stopped. No warning, no signal. One moment, the world was burning. The next, silence. The alien vessels remained where they were, above the largest cities, floating like titanic shadows against the sun. No movement, no communication. Just waiting. People looked up. Millions, billions, all wondering the same thing. What now? The days that followed were filled with fear, speculation, and failed attempts at contact. Drones were sent to approach the alien ships, but they were either ignored or vaporized instantly. Hackers tried to breach alien networks, if they even existed, but found nothing. Every attempt at diplomacy ended in frustration, confusion, or destruction. Then came the descent. One by one, the massive ships touched down in designated zones across Earth. Not crashing, not landing like aircraft. They simply arrived, settling into place as if gravity bowed to them. From their hulls emerged beings unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Tall, biomechanical figures moved with eerie grace, their forms shifting subtly between organic and synthetic. Some had translucent skin that pulsed with internal light. Others were fully armored, their movements precise, mechanical. At first, there was no attempt at interaction. The Zalari, though humanity did not yet know their name, simply stood outside their ships, observing, watching, waiting. Diplomats arrived under white flags. Military leaders approached cautiously. Scientists brought equipment, desperate to understand. But the aliens made no move to communicate. Their voices, if they even used sound, were undetectable to human ears. Instead, they emitted low-frequency pulses, vibrations that resonated to the ground rather than air. Attempts to translate failed. AI models struggled to find patterns. Linguists tried everything, from mathematical sequences to universal symbols. Nothing worked, at least not at first. Then someone noticed something strange. Among the pulses, embedded deep within the alien transmissions, were repeating sequences, constants, numbers, patterns that matched known universal truths. Pi, the golden ratio, prime numbers. It wasn't speech in the way humans understood it. It was code, a message hidden beneath layers of resonance. Scientists scrambled. Quantum computers ran simulations. Within hours of breakthrough, the Zalari weren't speaking in words. They were transmitting meaning through structured frequency shifts, language as math, as physics, as logic. And finally, a message was decoded. Observation complete. Ready for integration. No threats. No demands. Just those 6 words. Confusion turned to awe. What did it mean? Were they here to test us? To judge us? To bring us into something greater? Humanity had spent centuries searching the stars, wondering if we were alone. Now, the answer had arrived, not with peace signs or greetings, but with overwhelming force. And somehow, despite the devastation, despite the fear, hope stirred. Because for the first time, we weren't just looking into the void. Something had looked back. Governments convened emergency councils. Scientists debated theories. Religious groups claimed prophecy fulfilled. Conspiracy theorists argued manipulation. But one truth remained undeniable. Humanity was no longer the most advanced species in the galaxy. The Zalari remained patient. They didn't force themselves into human society. They didn't demand obedience or resources. Instead, they waited, and slowly, carefully, humanity reached out. Holographic projections appear around their ships, images of vast orbital cities, of machines that thought like humans, of energy manipulated with intent rather than force. These weren't just weapons. This was civilization, technology beyond comprehension. And with each new revelation, humanity changed. Fear gave way to curiosity. Resistance softened into fascination. The idea of war faded into something else entirely. Understanding. But what kind of understanding? Why had they come? Why now? And most importantly, what did they want from us? The silence between humanity and the Zalari stretched for days, thick with tension, uncertainty, and the weight of what had already happened. The alien ships remained grounded in their designated zones, massive, unmoving, like ancient monuments dropped from the sky. No further attacks came, no signs of aggression, just observation. Then, one by one, the Zalari began to move. They didn't walk like humans did. Their movements were fluid, almost unnatural, as if they weren't bound by gravity in the same way. Some hovered slightly above the ground, while others moved with strange, gliding motion that defied physics. They made no sounds, no gestures of greeting or hostility. They simply stepped forward, out from their vessels, into the world they had interrupted. Governments scrambled to respond. Scientists begged for time to study them. Military leaders argued over containment protocols. But the decision wasn't entirely human anymore. The first direct interaction happened in Beijing. A small team of linguists and quantum computing specialists had been working nonstop, analyzing the frequency pulses emitted by the Zalari. They discovered that embedded within those pulses were not just mathematical constants, but structured sequences, language encoded in resonance rather than sound. It was a form of communication designed for beings who thought in waves, in energy, in logic beyond spoken words. The breakthrough came when they sent back a transmission, a sequence of prime numbers, followed by a harmonic echo matching the Zalari's own frequencies. For the first time, the aliens responded, not with violence, not with silence, with understanding. A pulse rippled outward from the nearest Zalari being, resonating to the air like a deep, unheard note vibrating through bone. The holographic displays around their ship shifted, changing from abstract images to something more deliberate. Structured visuals, layered symbols, patterns that mimicked the structure of language. The message was clear: we see you. From that moment, contact became possible. Teams were assembled across the globe: scientists, philosophers, engineers, diplomats. Every nation with access to a landing zone sent representatives. Communication was slow at first, built on repetition, pattern recognition, and shared logic. But slowly, meaning emerged. The Zalari were not conquerors. They were observers. They had been watching Earth for centuries, long before the war, long before humanity reached for the stars. Their presence was not random. Their arrival was not an accident. They had come because the time had come, because humanity had changed. The war raging across the galaxy was old, ancient even, stretching back millennia between civilizations that had long since abandoned planetary conquest in favor of control over knowledge, energy, and influence. The Zalari were part of a faction that sought preservation, evolution, not destruction. And in humanity, they saw something rare: adaptability, creativity, potential. Where other species had stagnated, humans had evolved at an unprecedented rate. In just a few hundred years, they had gone from fire and stone to nuclear power and artificial intelligence. They learned, they fought, they built, and they did it faster than any known civilization. To the Zalari, this made humanity dangerous, but also valuable. Over time, the messages grew more complex. The Zalari showed glimpses of their world. Not a planet, but a network of orbital cities suspended around distant stars. Vast structures of light and metal, powered by energy drawn directly from the fabric of space itself. Beings like the Zalari lived there not as individuals, but as part of a greater whole, an existence where biology and technology were indistinguishable. They called themselves the Zalari, though that was only a rough translation. Their name meant something closer to those who carry the memory of the stars. They were explorers, historians, architects of civilizations. And now, they were offering humanity something no other species had ever been given: a choice, not to join the war, not to serve, but to learn, to rise, and to understand what it truly meant to be more than primitive. As the days turned into weeks, the world changed. What had begun as fear gave way to awe. What had been seen as invasion became revelation. Governments adapted, shifting from defense strategies to diplomatic efforts. Scientists worked alongside alien scholars, decoding technologies that rewrote entire fields of physics and engineering. For the first time in history, humanity was not alone. And for the first time, the future was not written by survival, but by choice. Yet beneath the wonder, questions lingered. Why now? Why had the Zalari waited so long to make contact? And why had they arrived in the middle of a galactic war? Because they were not the only ones watching, and not all who observed wished to teach. The truth came not in words, but in images, holographic projections flickering into existence around the Zalari ships, displaying battles fought across the void of space. Vast armadas clashing in silence, weapons that bent light and shattered planets, civilizations locked in a war that had raged for millennia. This was not a new conflict. It was ancient, relentless, and now it had reached Earth. The Galactic War was not about conquest in the traditional sense. It was about control, of knowledge, of energy, of entire star systems. Two dominant factions stood at its center: the Ziran Dominion, a rigid empire built on order and absolute hierarchy, and E3 Concord, a coalition of free-thinking species dedicated to exploration and progress. The Zalari were neither. They were neutral observers, keepers of history, and rarely did they interfere. But this time they had no choice. The Ziran had begun expanding aggressively, absorbing weaker civilizations, crushing resistance with overwhelming force. The E3 fought back, but their decentralized structure made coordination difficult. The balance of power had been shifting for centuries, and now it teetered on the edge. Earth had become the tipping point, not because of its strategic location, though it sat near a key hyperspace corridor, but because of what humanity represented: unpredictability. Where other species followed patterns, humans adapted. Where others stagnated, humans evolved. In the eyes of the galaxy, humanity was not just another primitive species. It was a wild card, and wild cards could change everything. The Zalari revealed more. Other factions had taken notice of Earth. Some saw potential. Others saw danger. There were whispers of rogue warlords already preparing expeditions to claim human technology, to enslave or exterminate before humanity could rise too far. The Zalari had arrived first, but they would not be the last. The message was clear. Neutrality was no longer an option. If humanity remained unaligned, It would be dragged into the war unwillingly, used as a battleground, a resource, a pawn. But if they chose a side, if they joined one of the great factions, they might have a chance to shape their own destiny. The Zalari offered something different. Not allegiance, not servitude, but partnership. They proposed a path forward, one where humanity could learn, grow, and decide for itself what kind of species it wanted to become. But time was running out. Other forces were coming. Across the world, governments convened emergency sessions. Scientists debated ethics. Military leaders calculated risks. Citizens flooded the internet with opinions, protests, theories. For the first time in history, every nation faced the same existential question. What do we do now? Some called for immediate alliance with the Zalari, arguing that learning from them was the only way to survive. Others warned against dependence on alien influence, fearing that humanity would lose its identity, its sovereignty. Religious groups interpreted the events as divine judgment. Conspiracy theorists claimed manipulation, deception, even simulation. But beneath the noise, a deeper fear took root. What if the Zalari weren't telling the whole truth? What if there was more at stake than anyone realized? Because while the Zalari spoke of observation and opportunity, there were hints, small, subtle ones, that suggested something else, something hidden. One scientist in Berlin noticed inconsistencies in the holographic battle records. Certain details didn't match known physics. Weapons appeared where they shouldn't have. Entire fleets vanished mid-battle, as if erased. When she tried to ask questions, her access was revoked. In Tokyo, a linguist working on decoding the Zalari's frequency language reported strange anomalies. Buried messages, layered beneath the main transmissions. When he tried to trace them, his equipment failed and his notes disappeared. In Nairobi, a military analyst reviewed footage of the initial attacks. He found something disturbing. The destruction hadn't been random. Specific locations had been targeted. Research facilities, energy grids, communication hubs. Not just military bases, but infrastructure critical to global stability. It wasn't just a test. It was preparation. For what? Nobody knew. But the implications were terrifying. Had the Zalari truly come to help? Or had they forced humanity's hand by making sure there was no other choice? As tensions mounted, the world waited. Then the sky changed again. New signals appeared. Faint, distant, but unmistakably approaching. Not from the Zalari. Not from any known source. Something else was coming. And this time it wouldn't wait. Humanity had been given a choice. But the clock was ticking. And the stars were watching. The decision was not made in a single moment, nor by any one leader. It came from everywhere at once. From the quiet discussions in war rooms and research labs, from the passionate speeches of diplomats and scientists, from the silent nods exchanged between soldiers who understood what was at stake. Humanity chose to rise, not as subjects, not as weapons, but as something new, a species no longer bound by its past, no longer defined by Earth alone. The alliance with the Zalari was not one of submission, but of partnership, a shared path forward where knowledge, technology, and destiny were built together. The first step was understanding. Zalari scholars, some biological, some entirely synthetic, began working alongside human scientists, engineers, and philosophers. Cities became interspecies hubs of learning, where alien minds met human ingenuity in ways never before imagined. Quantum computing models were rewritten overnight, unlocking secrets of physics that had eluded humanity for centuries. Energy manipulation, once the realm of science fiction, became reality. Materials once thought impossible were synthesized using techniques learned from Zalari transmissions. Earth changed. In just months, entire industries were revolutionized. Fossil fuels became obsolete as energy harvesting from quantum fields replaced traditional power grids. Medical advancements eradicated diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Artificial intelligence evolved beyond anything previously conceived, not as replacements for humans, but as collaborators. Intelligent systems designed to enhance, not replace human thought. Governments adapted. Nations that had spent centuries in conflict began to unify, not out of fear but necessity. The old divisions, the borders drawn in blood and history, began to blur in the face of something greater: survival among the stars. But with progress came resistance. Some factions refused to accept the alliance. They saw the Zolari's presence as an intrusion, their technology as a threat to human autonomy. Underground movements formed, warning that dependence on alien knowledge would strip humanity of its identity. Some whispered darker theories, that the Zolari had manipulated events from the beginning, that the war had been engineered to bring humanity into their fold. And then there were those who feared what lay beyond the veil, because the sky was no longer empty. As humanity embraced its transformation, the signals grew stronger. The approaching force, unknown, unaligned, was drawing closer. Not the Ziran Dominion, not the Ethery Concord. Something else. Something older. The Zolari did not speak of it openly, but in the quiet moments, when human researchers asked too many questions, they saw hesitation. A flicker of something beneath their calm, logical exteriors. Concern, perhaps even fear. The truth was undeniable now. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a beacon, a signal sent across the galaxy that a new species had awakened, not through conquest or destruction, but through choice. And choices have consequences. Across the world, preparations began, not for war, not yet, but for the next step. Spaceports expanded beyond orbit. The first interstellar-capable vessels, built using a fusion of human and Zolari technology, were launched toward distant stars. Colonization efforts began not just on Mars or the Moon, but beyond the solar system. Humanity was no longer looking up at the stars. They were reaching for them. Children born in this era would never know a world without alien contact. Their education included lessons not just in human history, but in galactic civilization. Language courses taught both spoken words and frequency-based communication. Philosophy classes debated not just ethics, but the nature of consciousness across species. Humanity was changing, not just technologically, but culturally, spiritually, fundamentally. The question was no longer are we alone? It was what will we become? Then the first message arrived, not from the Zolari, not from the Ziran or the Ethery, from something else. A transmission, received simultaneously across every major observatory, every satellite, every deep space array. No words, only a symbol, a spiral of light and shadow rotating endlessly, and beneath it, a pulse, a heartbeat, a call, and the universe answered. Humanity stood at the edge of infinity, not because it was chosen, not because it was forced, but because it decided to rise, to learn, to fight, to survive, to explore, to become more than primitive, to become part of something vast, terrifying, and beautiful. And as the first human ships left the solar system, carrying explorers, scientists, and dreamers alike, the stars finally had someone worthy to meet them.